Hello, everyone. Welcome back to House to House, the podcast where we talk about things that matter and things that we can't always get into a Sunday morning message and where we get deeper. I am Ben, your host, and with us today is back again our lead pastor, Vince. Vince, how are we doing today?
Great. Great to be back.
Yes.
I missed 1 week, and I was happy to see the podcast survived just fine.
Yeah.
Y'all had a great episode, great discussion, great comments, great value added. So it's great to be back, and yeah, thanks for having me back.
Of course. Before we jump in, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Got a bunch of comments last week. That was super helpful. There's things we missed from last week's topic that people commented. So if there's questions you had, we went through and answered all those. Because
I've been slacking commenting back also.
You were gone, so you didn't know what we were talking about necessarily.
I was slacking the week before, though. I got to get back to commenting back to everybody. So you guys can test me this week. Leave a comment, and I will comment back.
Like
I need to set aside a time to do it.
Yeah, it's got to be on the Google Cal.
Got to be on the Google Cal. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So comment what we missed, because there's going to be things we miss, but we want to give you guys a generalization of these topics every single week. There's going to be things we talk about maybe a little more intensely than you would have expected, and there's going to be some things we miss. So let us know. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, and continue to give us topic ideas. We're going to have more and more guests on the podcast
we are.
who are bringing in their passions, the things that they're excited about, the things that you guys are also probably excited about, but we want to hear from you guys, our church, as well. So let's get into today's topic.
Bum, bum, bum.
Okay. We know how the Bible is written. We talked about that in one of our first podcasts. We know how it was put together, but it wasn't written in English originally.
Surprise, surprise.
This is not all about us. It was not written in English. So we have this issue where there's like, you go to a bookstore and you go to the Bible section. I want to buy a Bible.
Yeah.
Let's say the first person, they're like, I want to start figuring out church. And they go to a bookstore. And they're like, oh, I'll just get the Bible, right? There's just one Bible. There's got to be just one Bible to choose. Why would there be 100 options right now?
Yeah.
There's 100 options when you go in the bookstore. Why is that? What is happening?
Why is that?
Yeah.
Such a good question. And I think it's one that it's like you come to church for a year, and if you don't ask in the first few months, then you're like, I think I've been here too long to ask why there's so many different versions of the Bible, and now I'm going to feel dumb if I ask. So one, there's no such thing as a dumb question. You can ask anytime, but we'll hopefully answer for some of you on this podcast. You can just pretend that you knew all along, right? Also, like you were saying before, we've kind of gone a lot of different twists and turns on this pod in terms of topics. We thought we were going to do like a Bible sort of series where we talk about the Bible a bunch of weeks in a row, and then we ended up having some guests on, and as of right now, there's really no roadmap. We're kind of just putting the plane together in the air still, but we thought, well, let's come back to this part of the Bible conversation and talk about translations and maybe genres.
Yes.
So translations. So here is sort of a high level. We'll zoom into this, but at a high level, yes, the Bible itself was written in Greek in the New Testament and some Aramaic and Hebrew in the Old Testament. And whenever you have any document that was written in another language, somebody has to translate it to the language that it's going to be read or taught in. And anytime there is translation work that is not an exact science, different people, we're not just talking the Bible right now. Anytime you're translating any document from one language to another, there are judgment calls to be made, and there are translation decisions to be made, and it is not something that's just like you plug it into a computer and it happens. So I actually talked about this during COVID.
Oh, okay.
When we used to do daily devos.
Oh, funny.
With me and the founding pastor, Bo.
Yeah.
Daily devos with Vince and Bo. And this is one of the topics that we hit at the time, and I'm actually going to go back and recycle some of the things from 5 years ago.
Nothing wrong with that. I don't think anything about translations of the Bible has changed in 5 years.
Yeah, nothing has changed, and I thought this was funny. Because people are like, wait, wouldn't you just translate it exactly?
Word for word.
Yeah, or just like people might not even know the differentiation of strategy. So let me try to break it down with an example
Yes.
from outside the Bible.
Okay.
Okay. So also this is hard to understand if you don't speak multiple languages, which I don't really. I learned Spanish at one point, forgot all of it, relearned it when I was working with a bunch of people who spoke Spanish, and then forgot it all again.
Wow.
So let's try to translate between two things that everybody knows, which are Southern dialect.
Oh, okay. I thought you do like iPhone, like Apple and.
Oh, yeah, that would
okay.
work too. But Southern dialect
Yes.
to more of a Midwestern dialect.
Okay.
Because the bridge is located right in the intersection of those two cultures.
Right.
Right? Where we got people who drive 30 minutes north from Falmouth. And they have some Southern dialect things. And we have people who drive 20 minutes south from Cincy, and they have very Midwestern things. So here, let's practice. Let's illustrate the task of translation.
Yes. Let's do it.
With two languages everybody knows, Southern and Midwestern English. Here's a Southern sentence. Ready? I reckon we ought to mosey on down to the local diner and get us some fixins and vittles.
Vittles? I've never heard that word. That's crazy. Okay.
That might have been too Southern.
Yeah, that was very Southern.
But you get the sentence in general.
We should get going and go have dinner or go have supper.
Yeah, I reckon we ought to mosey on down to the local diner and get us some fixins and vittles.
Yeah.
Now, if you know both languages fluently, you know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
But if someone had never heard any of those sort of Southern words before,
Yeah.
and you were going to translate it, you could choose one of three options.
Okay.
One would be a word-for-word translation.
Yeah. That makes
Two would
sense.
be a thought-for-thought translation. And three would be a paraphrase. Make sense? So let's do it for this example. I reckon we ought to mosey on down to the local diner and get some fixins and vittles.
Okay.
A word-for-word translation would look at each of those words
Yes.
and say, what is the Midwestern version of each word? So I reckon, what would be the Midwestern version?
I bet, or no, I reckon. I don't know. Just like, we should leave. I don't know. Like, it's time.
Well, just that one word. If
Reckon.
someone just said, what does reckon mean?
I don't even know. I feel like it's a thought in itself. I don't know.
Yeah, it's basically like I believe.
I believe. Yes.
Right?
Believe. Yes.
I
Good
reckon.
call. Good
So
call.
we'd say, for reckon, we will write in believe.
Okay.
We oughta. What is oughta Midwestern translation?
I feel like these are easy questions, and
That's fine. We're just
I'm blowing it.
Like we oughta. What does that mean? Just oughta.
Ought to. That's
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
we ought to. Mosey on down.
go.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna write these in because I had it slightly different, but
Okay.
this will make even more sense. Fixins.
Food.
Yep. Vittles.
Dessert. I'm guessing. I don't know
I think
that
it's
word.
just another really fixins is like I think it's kind of garnishes. I'm not even totally sure.
Oh, okay.
We'd have to ask a true Southern person, but I think fixins is like apps and garnishes. but I'm
Oh,
not
so
even
it's the
sure.
opposite, maybe.
People are going to leave a comment on this for sure, as they should. Let's just say fixins is like apps and stuff.
And then vittles might be entrees.
Yeah, maybe. I should
Maybe.
have done better research. But anyway, I reckon we ought to mosey on down to the local diner and get us some fixins and vittles.
Local diner to the restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To the
okay.
restaurant. Now, if we do a word-for-word translation,
Okay.
we get the sentence, I believe we ought to go to the local diner and have ourselves some apps and entrees.
Yeah.
Now, that is a word-for-word exact translation.
I would never say that though.
You would never say it.
Right.
Why?
It sounded like a computer. It sounded like a It
Right.
just sounded weird.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's try to go thought for thought. I'll rather than keep going back.
You're fine,
let's-
you're good.
Yeah. So a thought for thought might be, okay, what are the big thoughts? We should go
Yep.
to the restaurant and get some food.
Yes.
So you could translate it kind of big thoughts. Let's walk down to the diner and get a good meal. Right? That would be a thought for thought translation. A paraphrase would be more focused on just the core sentiment. So that might even be something just like, hey, let's go eat.
Yes.
Make sense?
Yeah. Let's go eat. Time to eat.
So word for word. So you tell me, what is the strength of a word for word?
You won't miss anything. That's what I would think of. There's nothing you could have missed.
The closest way to understand like the sort of
It's very literal.
Yeah, one for one literal correlation of every word. And I was talking more about this too, but it's never actually word for word. But the closer you get to that, the more you can draw the parallels between the word in English and the word in the original language. What's the weaknesses of word for word?
It doesn't sound authentic. It just sounds robotic. Doesn't sound fluent, that's for sure. It's just not how anyone would speak.
Yeah, it doesn't actually capture sort of the tone, the tone of voice, the emotion of the original thing. Like, I reckon we ought to mosey on down to the local diner and get some fixins and victuals. That's a certain spirit in that.
Yeah.
That if you were to say what that sounds like in Midwestern English is, I believe we ought to go to the local diner and have ourselves some apps and entrees, the original person who said that in the Southern way would say, that's not really the heart of what I said. They would say that it's a translation, but it doesn't carry the same spirit.
Yep.
Let's go to the other end. If we compare, so it's kind of a spectrum, word for word, thought for thought, paraphrase. If we go to the other end of the spectrum and say paraphrase, what are the strengths of that?
It's gonna be really the heart of what the person was trying to communicate is going to be communicated the same way.
What are the weaknesses?
You might miss, in this situation, we might say, let's go get some good food. They might have actually said, we better be getting apps. There's no apps, I'm not in.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of here. But
No, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. So those are those three big categories.
Yeah.
Word for word, thought for thought, or
Okay.
paraphrase.
Okay.
And they have strengths and weaknesses in all of them. And in the example we've seen so far, we haven't even included the Bible yet. All we've talked about is translating from more Southern dialect to more Midwestern dialect. So the same thing is true with the Bible.
Yeah.
When we're taking the original languages and we're translating into, for us, English, we have to make those same decisions. Should we go word for word?
Yep.
Well, if we do,
It's going to sound weird sometimes.
and
Maybe.
weird in a way that it feels actually not accurate to the original
Writer's heart or
writer's thought or heart or
Yeah.
sentiment. It's not just that, well, we want it to sound more palatable, so
Yep.
we don't like word for word. It's that if Paul spoke English, which he didn't,
Yep.
but if Paul spoke English and Greek and he watched a word for word translation, he would say, yeah, but that's not exactly how I meant it.
it's technically true, but you're missing it. Yeah.
You're missing sort of the emotion.
The gusto.
The gusto. You're missing some of the emotional nuances and sentiment and like my personality in
Yeah.
it. So when we talk about the translations that are less word for word, I think sometimes people think we're just trying to make it easier for people to understand, which can be true. But more than that, we're trying to make sure that people understand the way it was said at the time. Now, you can take it too far, obviously.
Yes.
But when we because some people are like it has to be word for word, and if it's not, you're a failure of a Christian or a failure of a Bible reader.
There are some people I was around in college that had very strong beliefs
Yeah.
that we had to use ESV, which is a word for word translation.
The extra spiritual version.
Extra spiritual.
Yeah. So I don't agree with that. One, I'm not always opposed to making it just a little simpler for the sake of just getting people to read it.
Yeah.
And slightly compromising some of the nuance. I don't think that's always the wrong decision.
Yeah.
But even if our only goal is study, if our only goal is Bible study,
Yeah.
you're not always best with just a word for word because you will miss some of the emotional and like strategic nuance that was in the original.
Got it.
Make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Should we do a couple quick Bible examples, or do you have a follow-up question?
No, I think I want to let's go into the Bible. That'd be cool. Let's
Okay,
do that
great.
for sure.
And then I have a list of like different translations that fall along the
Yep.
spectrum that might be helpful as well at some point. Although maybe we should put them in the show notes, in the description, as they say. But first of all, when people say they're giving the word-for-word translation like ESV, it is not actually word for word.
It's not okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know. When I hear word for word, I would assume that meant word for word.
Yeah. So there's something called an interlinear, which is where you literally write out the Koine Greek,
Okay.
which is the Greek that the Bible, the New Testament was written in.
Yes.
That was the specific version. It's not the same as modern Greek.
Yep.
It's Koine Greek. Or if you write out the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew, if you take those words and then write the English closest word right underneath it,
Yes,
that's
yeah.
called an interlinear.
Yeah.
So if you read an interlinear, if you read those English words, it won't make sense.
Okay. Do you have an
The
example?
grammar is different. Yeah. So like Romans 12, very famous passage. Romans 12, 1 and 2. A lot of us know this in the NIV. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. You know this one?
Keep
Come
going,
on.
keep
But
going.
be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Okay.
A lot of us have heard that in our lives. An interlinear would be, and not be conformed to the age this, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind in order to prove you what the will of God.
Not the same. Not the same.
It's nonsensical because the words aren't put in the same order in Koine.
Yeah, that's huge. I think for most of us, 90%, I could be totally wrong. 90% of the population learns Spanish, like you said. They flip everything. I don't know if you remember that, but they do. Sentences,
order. Yeah.
Sentences are the exact opposite direction.
Same kinds of things in Greek and Hebrew. Like
Okay.
it's not just an English structured sentence with different words.
Yeah.
So you have to make decisions, even with a most word for word mindset, you still are making translation decisions. So again, so there's the interlinear. If we could read Greek, it would be those Greek words, but in a normal Greek sentence structure, and it would make sense if you knew Koine, which I did at one point.
Just like
It's
everything.
been a hot minute.
We forget.
We forget. But a word-for-word translation, ESV, would be, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. That's like the closest trying to get an English word that most corresponds to each Greek word. It is pretty clear. It still is a little like, what does that really mean? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. What do you mean that by testing? Right?
Right.
We're not exactly
There's
sure.
a lot. When we read a word for word translation, there is definitely a lot more study, if that makes sense. Like there's a
You
lot more,
have to.
a lot of discussion. There's a lot of like, oh, I have to ask a bunch of extra questions to get to a point where maybe if we read the other version again, we'd say, oh, those are all questions this other version just answers.
Yep, exactly. So the NIV says, so again, the ESV, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. You're kind of like, what am I testing and what is good, acceptable, and perfect? Now, the ESV fan says, that's not shown in the text on purpose because you have to study it and maybe even go back to the Greek so that you make sure you know sort of like possibly are there different options for how to interpret the Greek. The NIV says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. So that is saying that as your mind is renewed, then you can more clearly see God's will. That's a little harder to see at a glance in the ESV. Now, I don't even know if this is true for this passage, but the sort of criticism of the NIV or translations like that is people will say, the NIV is helping you understand like what the Greek meant, but it's not 100% sure. The NIV isn't 100% sure.
Like that could have not been the writer's purpose? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because whenever you're trying to say, okay, what does this really mean? It's not always, like even our fixins and vittles. Like, that's a stupid example because you could look that up.
Yeah.
But with some of these Greek things, were like, did he mean it this way or this way? Or like, let's say there was different, let's say you talked to one more Southern dialect person and they said fixins means this. You talked to another one and they said fixins means this. And they're arguing with each other. Well, as you're translating to English then, you have to decide which way are we going to go.
Yeah.
Or not English, but more Midwestern English. So the same thing happens with Greek is that people who study the Greek say, it could have meant a little more this, it could have meant a little more this. So the ESV mindset says, we're going to write it in a way that you can't know.
Yep.
You would have to make that decision for yourself or study it for yourself. The NIV will often say, well, 70% of scholars think it leans a little more this way.
Yeah.
So we are going to translate it into English that way.
Yeah.
So it's clear and people aren't confused. What does this even mean? But this is why in a lot of churches, we don't do this much at the Bridge, but in a lot of churches they'll say, now your Bible might say this, but if you look at the actual Greek, it actually says this. That is generally the preacher going after the NIV or something like that, a more thought-for-thought translation, and saying, the translators made this call based on their understanding so that it was clear to you that this is what the Greek meant. But they weren't totally sure. It was their best attempt.
Yeah.
And I actually know better. Now, most of the time, I think those pastors are wrong.
Might be some pride there to be like, I know better than
The translators.
this giant group of people translating the Bible at one time. Group,
And maybe some pride, or maybe they're just Greek nerds and they really think they've got a better understanding.
And I'm sure there are times where that is true.
Yeah. And there are also different thought-for-thought translations where they will have a slightly different meaning in one thought-for-thought versus the other, and especially the paraphrase one. Like, there's the part where Jesus says the rules about divorce.
Okay.
I think it's Matthew or Mark, where he's like, if you, unless it's for marital unfaithfulness, if you divorce a woman, you sin. And then the disciples say, it's better that we shouldn't get married then.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, the one who can accept this word should. Remember this?
Yeah.
Kind of something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
I can't remember the exact phrase. It was basically like, he says, not everyone can accept this word, but the one who can accept it should. If you look at the Message translation, which is more of a paraphrase.
It's
even further
down on the spectrum of,
Yeah. The Message is basically like, we're going to make it just so obviously makes sense to the reader, even if we're sometimes making decisions that are based on like 65% clarity on the Greek. The Message literally says, so Jesus says, not everyone can accept this word, but the one who can accept it should. Some people translate that not everyone can accept this word, meaning not everyone can accept the high demands of marriage.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because he says...
That's what I think of when you first say that.
Yes, because they're like, we shouldn't even get married. He said, not everyone can accept this word.
Not everyone's good enough. Not everyone can handle the weight of marriage. Commitment of marriage. Yeah.
That's how Eugene Peterson translated it in the Message.
Yes.
I think in the NLT, it goes the other way.
Okay.
And says, not everybody can handle the high calling of singleness. Meaning Jesus responded basically saying, they were like, we shouldn't even get married. And he was like, hey, not everyone can handle singleness though.
Like that's a hard ask to be single.
Yeah.
Because there's some stuff on that side of the coin that's hard to manage.
Hard ASK, just for clarity of what. I was like,
hard ask.
Yeah, hard ask. Let's get you're fine. Like we've had to, anyway. So again, like an ESV is going to take that Greek and leave it ambiguous. Go, not everyone can accept this. And then you're like, well, what's the this? Is it singleness or marriage? The ESV is going to be like, this is what the words say, you figure it out.
This is the word of the Lord.
This is the word of the Lord. And as you go down the spectrum from word for word to thought for thought to paraphrase, and the paraphrase ends, they're going to be like, let's just spell it out so they're not confused.
Yep.
So there is a danger there because like in that verse in particular, not everyone agrees on whether Jesus meant not everyone can accept the calling of singleness, not everyone can accept the calling of marriage. So I talked for a long time.
No, that's good.
Questions on that, clarifications, or your thoughts? Or
it's very helpful. I think I'm trying to think. The word for word people are just really scared someone else is going to translate it wrong. The meaning. don't you think?
Yes. They're very like, we don't want, if we spell it out, this Greek word for that English word, we can be most sure we're not adding something to the meaning that wasn't there in the original.
Right. Yeah. And then the opposite side is just, I just don't know what this is even saying, right?
That's the downside?
Yeah.
Yeah, the downside of the word for word is that sometimes people might not know what it means, or even more than that, you might lose the actual, like, language. Like, it just wouldn't be how Paul would talk in English, or Peter would talk in English, or it just sounds not how they... Because they were generally writing in, like, very layman's Greek. Like... They say Paul, you can tell he was more educated than like the other New Testament writers because it was written just so colloquial, just like everyday speech. So when we take that Greek, we translate it into this very like stilted, structured like wooden English. They would be like, that's not even really like how I said that, or whatever. So you lose in theory, you lose some of the meaning when you go word for word.
Cool.
Same way with our fixins and vittles thing.
Nice.
But the danger on the paraphrase side is that you're making meaning decisions that are not actually clear across scholars.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay, good.
So when you read the Bible, what do you read? Or what should we read? Or how should we study the Bible? How should we handle this?
Yeah.
There's so many translations. What should I do?
Yeah. Go to seminary, learn Greek, only read in Greek, only read in Hebrew.
We're all called to be.
We're all called to do that.
That's a joke.
That's a joke. Yeah. My best advice would be to go to BibleGateway.com.
Yeah.
Which is a free website. And if you're going to read a passage, if you're going to study a passage, look at a bunch of translations across the spectrum. And see where is the paraphrase nuancing it differently than the word for word?
Yeah.
Where is different paraphrases nuancing it differently from each other? And compare between them. Knowing, except for KJV, they're all working from the exact same source material for the most part. So once we get to the translation stage, we're not debating what did the original Greek and Hebrew say, which is a whole nother thing called textual criticism. We've talked about that in church a little bit before. But basically, I would say read a variety. If you're going to read it for your daily devotions, I think a thought for thought is good. NIV is good. CSB is good.
NLT, what's that?
NLT is a little more paraphrasing.
Okay.
So you're at the risk with that of those translators are saying, we want this to be clear. And so if we're not totally sure if it meant A or B, we're just going to go with A or B so that you are not confused on what it means. But there will be some decisions that are made for you as the reader that you may not want to be made for you.
Our church always references NIV.
We
Is that
preach
right?
from the NIV. We preach from the NIV, which to me I think is the sort of most
balanced.
I think it's more balanced than going ESV for a broad context. But if you're going to study, I think you owe it to yourself to look at the spectrum.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, what do you think?
When I jump into a life group setting, at least when I'm at home and I'm reading my own Bible, I pick one and just stick with it.
Yep.
Like if I'm like, I'm not going to double up my reading plan to be like, I just read it, now let's read it again in a different one. And if you want to do that, that's totally fine. I like to choose one when I'm by myself. And when I'm in a group, that's when I start pulling up like different ones. Or if I'm preparing something for like a group of people, that's when I start pulling up different ones. And I usually pull up those three I pull up ESV, NIV, and then NLT.
Oh yeah, that's great.
I
That's
pull
the
up
spectrum.
all three.
That's the spectrum right there.
Those are probably the three that I have the understanding that are Protestant churches like agree upon, I guess, or like most commonly used maybe.
NLT is probably the most well-accepted paraphrase.
Yeah.
Where it's the least smushed.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah, one nuance I'll say too, even though I just said read a bunch and compare.
Yeah.
If you are new to Bible reading, pick one. and pick the easiest one,
which is probably NLT.
which is probably NLT.
And there's nothing wrong with choosing the easiest one.
Yes.
Like, I don't have a high reading level. I listen to everything. And so when I read slow.
Yep.
I like can understand language, but I just am a slow reader in the first place.
Yeah.
So I benefit from just reading NIV when I'm by myself. When I first started reading the Bible, I read NLT for the first 5 years, probably.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's great. I hear one person say the best translation of the Bible is the one that you actually enjoy reading.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like, at that point, like, if there is one you enjoy,
Stick with it.
stick with it.
Yeah, and then I think the one thing you can do when you're just early is if you hit a verse that is either really confusing or really convicting or really like, wait, what is that?
That doesn't add up, maybe.
Yeah, then you can look at some other ones as well.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think that's really helpful for everyone to hear.
Great.
So, is there anything else from translations? I don't think so. I think we got everything.
No, it might be worth touching just briefly on the KJV thing.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so a common thing people will say as well is that you should only read from the KJV.
Why would anyone have
King
such a bold
James
claim?
Version. Such a bold claim. I actually had to research this today because I haven't in a while. I don't know if I've ever fully researched it. We did talk about it in seminary. I remember hearing about it in class and going, oh, I never got that before. But basically, at the time of the Reformation, there was a Catholic linguist who wanted to bring some amount of reform to the Catholic Church. And he sort of looked at all the Greek manuscripts and came up with this thing. I don't know if it was called this at the time or if it's called it in retrospect, but it's called now, I'm gonna mispronounce it, the Textus Receptus. So it was essentially him looking at the Greek manuscripts that he had access to. Let me just give like the tiniest little explanation here. We have all these different Greek manuscripts from the New Testament, and there'll be little differences between them. Spelling errors, or a word is different in one. And so we don't have like the originals that the apostles wrote. Those are gone. They were lost early on. But we have copies, and those copies are all a little different. So we lay out the copies on a big table and say, okay, these 5 copies agree on this thing. This one disagrees. So we're going to go with the 5
Probably
that
going to go
agree.
with the 5. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So he essentially did that and came up with this thing called the Textus Receptus. And the Protestant reformers took it and said, we believe, probably rightly at the time, this is our most accurate window into the original Greek.
Yeah.
And based their translations on the Textus Receptus.
Yes.
For about 300 years, that was the non-Catholic Bible.
Yes.
Didn't change, stayed the same. Around the 1800s, archaeologists found way earlier Greek manuscripts.
Which, that's a big deal.
Huge deal.
Earlier, that's closer to the original. Like, we can assume that it's more accurate, probably.
Yes. So they said, hey, a lot of this stuff in the Textus Receptus is not totally lining up with some of this early manuscripts we just found.
What a win.
You would think, what a win. So they came up with a new thing. I can't remember. We call it, the current version of it is the NA27. Basically, scholars are now constantly looking at all these manuscripts.
Yeah.
And if they ever find new information, they keep updating the Greek, like sort of synthesis
Yes.
of all these different documents. They keep updating it. It's like every couple of years there's a new one. It was like NA26, NA27. It's like Nestle A something, whatever. The KJV people have said 2 things. One, a lot of the scholars who are looking at those older Greek manuscripts are some of them are more scholars than theologians.
Yes.
And so they get skeptical of their integrity. And they also, as far as I understand, the KJV only people say, God basically promised us his word.
Yeah.
And this is what we've had all along, was this Textus Receptus thing. So you're essentially asking me to believe that we had a Bible with errors for like Ever since the Reformation and before,
Right.
God would never allow that. God would never allow us to have a New Testament, especially with some errors in it. He would have made sure his word is preserved.
Yeah.
And so because these earlier copies we found seem to contradict, we are going to stick with the Textus Receptus. We're going to stick with the KJV because we believe that God would never allow us to be without, like, the true, without error Greek.
Interesting. I'm of the belief of like, I feel like I could have made a mistake, or like we could have made a mistake. I get the argument of like, this guy's a huge scholarly academic, one side of the coin, not really a theologian. I get that argument, but I also believe that we could have made a couple little errors.
100%. 100%. I mean, if you're a Protestant, you kind of already believe most of the church made a bunch of errors for a long
That's
time.
true. That's true.
You kind of believe the whole thing reset in 1500, whatever, 1514 or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am of the mindset that is much more, I want to know what those oldest Greek manuscripts that we find say.
Yeah.
And if we find something earlier, I want to know what that one says, because the closer we get to the original documents, the more accurate it is. And I can live in a reality where we had only a Bible with less accurate Greek for a season, and God was faithful and got us earlier copies.
Yeah.
Again, a KJV only person might nuance it a little differently, but as best as I can understand.
It sounds like they're really. It sounds to me like they might be pretty scared of a new group of people looking at these documents who are just further away from the Lord, potentially.
Yeah. And they're definitely not all further away from the Lord. It's just more of an academic pursuit. So some of them are Christians, some of them aren't Christians. But their biggest goal across the entire spectrum is just how can we figure out what those original documents said?
Yeah, just accuracy.
Accuracy is all they care about.
Yeah.
And that's why they keep putting out new ones, is to try to keep getting more and more and more.
Yeah,
accurate.
I imagine they would be stoked both ways. Like, hey, we have like 100 more earlier documents that say that 98% of the Bible, how we wrote it is exactly right. And now there's a word here or there that we switch, and 1.8% more is still accurate. Yeah. The theme, the context is still the paraphrasing or the translation is still the same, but there's 0.2% that's like, you know what, actually, that did probably mean the singleness or whatever. The single, it's harder to be single, maybe.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yep, totally. I think some of the hardest parts for the KJV crowd is like, and I'm sure this will ring a bell, like every once in a while, maybe 2 or 3 times in the New Testament, there'll be a pretty big chunk that'll be like, hey, this wasn't in our oldest manuscripts.
Yes.
Like the
Luke.
Handling snake ones.
Oh, there's a Luke one.
I think the Mark one is handling snakes, and then there's the Jesus writing in the sand.
Yep. Everyone
That
has
might be
different
the
things
Luke
about the writing in the sand. Yeah.
So that's part of that, as far as I understand, part of that post KJV thing.
That's where that came from, you think?
I believe so. I just researched this morning. I was like looking through a bunch of stuff, but as far as I understand, the KJV crowd is like, no, that's Textus Receptus. That's right. That's in. Where the early. That's why it says the earliest
manuscripts don't have this, is because we're referring to the new manuscripts we found are earlier than the ones that wrote the KJV. I see.
Yes.
I have the interpretation. So this story is the one where the woman is caught in adultery, and they only bring the woman, they don't bring the man, right? And they're like, the law says he should be stoned. Jesus, what should we do?
Yep.
And one person I listened to said they believe that this is, it was such a powerful story of one of Jesus' like things he did in his ministry that it just got passed down through storytelling, that it was so powerful that they added it in.
That could be.
I don't know.
That could totally be, and that would fit with this understanding.
Right, it would fit.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Totally.
I didn't know
It
that
might
at all.
still have been true.
Yeah.
It just might not have been written by the apostles.
Right, because when we read, I think it's the end of John, where he said, and Jesus did so much more. This is just what I fit in this book. And I always thought that was one of the stories that was so powerful that didn't fit in the book, that they were just like, guys, we got to fit this in.
Put it in.
We got to put it in. Like, this is a great story.
Yeah. Could totally be.
But
could totally be.
That is not that's not true. That's not proven at all.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Fun. Okay.
Fun. So fun.
So fun. Okay. So let's jump into genres.
Yeah.
Genres come up. How do I say this? The Bible is not written like a story the entire time. And if you pick up a Bible and you open up to a random spot, you might be very confused for many reasons. How was the Bible designed, I guess, or written in all these different genres? What do we mean by that? What are we saying right now?
Yeah. So I think in our, whatever it was, a few episodes ago, we sort of laid out the big story of the Bible.
Yeah.
Like, what is the actual story piece?
Yeah.
But then as you go through that story, there's these books that sort of accompany the story that don't tell the story, but are related to the story. Like, I think we talked the last time about the book of Psalms. It doesn't really tell a story, but it was written mostly by David, and it connects to that part of the timeline of the history of events. So basically, there are different genres of the books of the Bible. Some of them tell the story, and some of them are other things. And it's important to know which genre you're reading if you're trying to apply it to your life. So should we just zoom through?
Yeah.
What was your question?
I think.
Did I go somewhere
No,
weird?
you're totally good. No, I like to think about it like if you walk into a bookstore today, there are different genres in a bookstore.
Yeah.
And the Bible also has different genres of writing in the Bible. So in a bookstore, there's crime, there's suspense, there's autobiography.
Yep.
And what does the Bible use for their genres?
It's great. Great. Love it. So first, maybe a big one, in a way, it's sort of, there's probably different ways you could break this up, but the first 5 books of the Bible are called the Pentateuch.
Okay.
I believe penta means 5. Pentagram, right? So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's the Pentateuch. That's the oldest foundational part of the Bible. And for a lot of the stuff you read in the Bible besides those 5, when they mention like the law, they're talking about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So it has the creation story. So some of it is narrative, but it's kind of called its own genre name. So some of it is just narrative or history, but some of it is law. The law given to Moses at Mount Sinai, especially Leviticus is a big piece of that. And then there's some in Numbers and Deuteronomy as well. So those first 5 books, important thing to remember, obviously the narrative is easy to remember. This is like history, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the history part. But also the law parts don't all relate one-to-one to us today. There was a guy who gave his life to the Lord. This is when we were at a different church. And he started reading the Bible.
Yeah.
Got into Leviticus. And he came to me and he was like, so I am not allowed to have sex with my wife when she's on her period. He's like, good to know. Good to know. Because
I love how we whispered that.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It's like going online.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, right. But that was part of the law given to Moses to the Israelites. But Jesus came to fulfill that law. So we believe that the laws given to Moses that were more about ceremonial cleanliness do not apply to us today as Christians as we live under Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's as far as we interpret what Jesus said, and it's also what Paul really clarified.
Okay.
We don't have to follow these Old Testament laws anymore. So when you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, obviously we believe all the story is true.
Yeah.
And we believe the laws are true, but we don't believe those laws apply to us all today in a one-for-one way.
Yes.
Any thoughts on what to do with those laws?
No,
If they don't apply to us, do we skim them? Do we just cross them out? Take a razor blade, cut them out?
Not necessarily.
But maybe.
I don't know. I think they give us context for some of what these people were, I guess, the standards they had to be held to. I think it gives us context to, like, well, I definitely, if I don't already believe I fall short of the grace of God, like I definitely do if I read all of these laws. So that's helpful to realize, just like the people knew they were very far from God.
Yep. I think it makes you feel grateful now that we live under grace. And we're like, wow, the list of things I have to do now is actually way smaller. The requirements in a way it's a higher standard because we're supposed to sacrifice our entire lives for Jesus.
Yeah.
But if we sin, we can go straight to God in repentance rather than having to go slaughter an animal at the temple, right? So I think that's a huge piece, is that it gives us gratitude. It also gives us, I think, a window into, and I think you're saying this as well, but a window into the high standards of God.
Yeah.
So you appreciate his holiness and you appreciate his splendor and grandeur and all that sort of thing.
I used to have a document that had like all these like different attributes about God.
Yeah.
And like the verses according, talking about them. And it was always funny because I'd look at that document at different times of my life and I would be like, I'm not like, I'm thinking God is like a friend. God is like my father, but like he is not my king, or he's not whatever this attribute is. Like he is holy. Like it is important to, it would be a bummer if we cut out those 5 books of the Bible because of the holiness, the majesty, the greatness.
100%. The holiness, I think, especially, I love what you're saying. I think you see his holiness, especially in those laws, because it's so about like staying separate from immorality and cleanliness and purity and all that sort of thing. So that's the first genre.
Okay.
The Pentateuch, or the law. Next genre is history.
Yeah.
So this is Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. In a way, the Gospels are a history too, but we'll put them in a different category. But basically, these are the narrative books that describe the main events that happened through the history of God's people, the Israelites. Any thoughts, Ben, for reading those books and how to apply those?
Yeah, I think narratives, do you know, so I had 3 different categories when I looked at the Bible Project. You had you're about to show us 7, I think.
7.
But do narratives make up most of the Bible then in your 7? Do you know?
I don't think they're the majority in this particular framework. I'm not positive though. I'm not positive percentage-wise. The framework that you saw had 3.
The framework I saw from the Bible Project had 3, and I think it said 46% or 43% of the Bible is narrative. So just under half. I heard something that I thought was really helpful to me is the way narratives are written in the Bible at this time are way different than narratives are written today. If you read a story today or you watch a movie today, the detail is intense. Like there's so much details. Like they're really inviting you to imagine the scene and everything about it. And so maybe if the Bible was written today, like let's say everything just happened, but in our mindsets of narratives today, you'd probably see a lot more detail. And the Bible would probably be a lot longer. But in this time, when we read the Bible for the first time, you might be like, this feels really simple. And slow and just not that attention grabbing. But when the details they do include are very, very important. I think one of the, like a character's appearance. Samuel was tall. David was small.
Yeah, or Saul was tall. Yeah.
Saul.
Yeah,
Sorry. You're good. Saul was tall.
Yeah.
That's supposed to rhyme. That's what it was. That's how I'm supposed to remember that. I forgot.
Good.
Saul was
Good.
tall, and David was small. So the detail.
Always encouraging to me.
I can be like David. It's funny because not often do we get very much details about characters, but when we do, they're important.
Yeah.
Is the part, and that kind of helps us because the Bible's already fairly long, and so the details do matter here because if we were to talk about that story more in depth, it's like Saul trusted in himself, Saul trusted in his strength and his glory and how great he is, and David was like, I'm weak, I need you, God, I'm desperate for you.
Yep.
And that comparison. So the details matter. The details told us a little bit about the characters and connected to them.
Yeah. 100%. There'll oftentimes be, like, especially in Kings, there'll be like, 5 paragraphs, which it wasn't even written in paragraphs, but when it's translated, it's like 5 paragraphs of like setup before a battle. And then it'll be like, and then they went to battle and won. And then on to the next part. It doesn't like describe the battle at all. Because it's written, like you said, to make a point. It's telling a story, but they're still trying to draw different things to the surface to make a point rather than just tell an exciting story. So, yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind for sure, is that it's written as a story, but to teach us. And this goes back to our Bible study episode we did with Olivia.
Yeah.
Where it's trying to teach us something about God or something about humanity or something about how God and humanity interact with each other. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. I think when you're reading this, again, if you are reading the narrative and you bump into some of the laws, if you're reading some of the history and you bump into some of those Old Testament laws, as a Christian, many of them Christians don't believe we are still required to follow. But they are windows into who God is, how God interacts with us, and a lot of that stuff does hold true today. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so the majority of how you see God interacting is still windows into who he is, how he works, how we work. Some of the nuance there is it is pre-Jesus, so it is pre-grace. It's an old covenant where we came to God through following the Mosaic law. So in some ways God seems harsher, and in some ways God was revealing himself to humanity in a more, harsh isn't the right word, but a more sort of high standards or strictness covenant. That's I'm not saying that perfectly, but you get the idea. But it still can give you good windows into who God is and how he works.
The story of Kings where he said, then the war happened, or then they won, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, every movie would be like that. The war scene is like got to be the biggest scene.
So long.
It's so long. Like,
Yeah.
That's the fun part. That's the climax. That's the moment.
Yep.
But that's not what the author cares for you to know about in the moment. Like, I'm trying to think of a different story. Let's just Adam and Eve. Story of Adam and Eve. There's a lot of potential discussion questions you might have, but the author doesn't want you to ask those questions. Like, why is the serpent even there? Like, who put the serpent? Like, why would the serpent even been placed there? The author, if the author wanted you to know, I think he would have told you. But we have a lot of there's ambiguity there. Yeah. And I think sometimes we as readers, because of how we write narratives today, we sometimes read the Bible how we would watch a movie today. Like, if we watched the movie, we'd be like, why the heck is the serpent there? Like, like I have a lot of questions. Like, this is, I want all the answers. I want all the explanations. I want to know the background. And the authors wrote this in a way where some of the time there's questions that just, they might not matter. I guess. I don't know how else to say it, but.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Or at least they didn't matter enough for God to answer them yet. In the word.
Yet is important because I think Adam and Eve is that where they say Eve's offspring? Yeah. The key word offspring.
Yep.
They don't write many words, but then they write the word offspring.
Yeah.
And then offspring comes up again and again and again. And then as we read all of the Bible, the whole story, which is like the greatest story ever told stuff, then it all comes together. And we're like, oh, like that word or that detail did matter.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows up and again with the genealogy all the way to Jesus. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Yep. I love it. All right. So we got law, we got history.
Mm-hmm.
Next big one, wisdom and poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the more artistic books.
Mm-hmm.
Psalms,
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes,
Mm-hmm.
Song of Solomon. Job is often included in here. Job obviously has some narrative in it, but then there's these long prayers of Job talking to God, as the friends talking to Job, that feel like written more poetically than a typical narrative would be. Thoughts on interpreting those books, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon?
Not necessarily. When we run into them, I think it's easy to, how do I say it? I wonder if most men run into those and are like,
Skip it.
lame, like lovey-dovey emotion, like
Yeah.
like this doesn't matter.
Yep.
And then women are like more generally like diving into it and like feeling it and like
Read them Psalms all day.
yeah. How should we read the Psalms? I guess I want to know your answer.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
other poetry like
Yeah.
literature.
Yeah, I think it can be. Well, let's start with the Psalms first. We'll touch on that real quick. So, a lot of the Psalms, again, written by David, a lot of times in very dark seasons. So, it can sometimes be a helpful way to give yourself permission to notice your emotions, get more in touch with them, become more aware of them. When we believe the Bible is inspired by God and God chose to place these passages in there that are very emotional, there's sort of a side benefit that it can help us understand our emotions as well. It gives us space also to say some things to God that are sometimes sort of hard to say.
Like, I can say that out loud. That's a lot of the things for me when I see some of the greats, I guess, express their frustration so vocally, like loudly, like audibly, like it's real. Like they're not hiding how they're feeling or how they're experiencing life right now.
Yeah. Yes. David so often is like, why do you let injustice continue? And why don't you slay the wicked? And why do you have all these corrupt people in power? And we obviously have to take those passages and balance them with other passages about trusting God, trusting His sovereignty. But if we go all the other way, if we scrap the Psalms, you can end up in that like always happy Christianity is the only real version of Christianity.
Yeah, or like when you're struggling and you walk up to someone who's like, well, everything works for your good. Like, I never feel better if someone tells me that.
It's all going to be fine.
It's going to be fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Trust God.
Yeah. I don't know if you're married, but like your wife comes to
I
you.
am married.
Yeah, I know you're married. But your wife comes to you. Classic example of like, maybe they're worrying about something or it's like, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
It's
don't
like,
worry about it.
It's just like, it's not helpful. We know it's not helpful. And this part of the Bible actually gives us freedom, I think, to be like, it's okay to struggle. It's okay to not be like, sure. It's okay to be like expressive and emotional and like, I don't know what's going on right now or like upset, mad, sad, grieving, depressed. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I think obviously as you read the Psalms, again, it's all inspired, but you say, these are meant to be poetic. They are, in a way, the doctrine they're teaching is maybe like what we're saying. The doctrine is more be genuinely truthful with God about what's going on inside you.
Yes, that's the important. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't always mean that it's meant to teach like the right state of mind is to be God why aren't you doing what you said you're going to do?
No, not at all.
Forever.
Yeah.
Right? So we want to hold that in balance. So like these are meant to be poetic expressions from people to God that give us space to make the same sort of poetic expressions, not necessarily saying every poetic expression is like meant to be theology, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, like you said earlier, if we didn't have this part of the Bible and church, and then we had church, I guess church would probably tell us everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're fine. Trust the Lord.
Yeah.
And like anytime someone had any feeling that was not joy or thankfulness, peace, we'd be like, what the heck is wrong with them? Because we still say that sometimes.
Yeah, we do.
We still say that sometimes. And then we read about some very iconic people, I should say, or iconic groups of people in the Bible who do share their heart and they are genuine, like you said. And then there's something about, it's kind of feels like a life group to me. If I walk in a life group, if I'm part of a life group or part of a group of guys or girls who you're trying to do life with and you never share anything actually real, you actually never feel known.
Yep.
You don't feel like people actually know the real you.
Yep.
Because you kind of just put on a facade and you've been hiding your problems and hiding everything that you're going through in your life. And I don't really feel like Vince knows me right now because I never share what's really going on in my heart.
Yep.
I think what you said earlier of like, if we have that relationship with God, it's going to be it's not going to be a very fulfilling relationship.
Yep. Totally. Yeah, I love that. Same way we have to be vulnerable with other people to be known. We have to do that with God as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, just a couple quick examples. Psalm 44, you sold your people for a pittance, gaining nothing from their sale. Awake, O Lord, why do you sleep? Rouse yourself. Like there are other Bible verses that say God does not sleep.
Yeah.
But then here we have him saying, why do you sleep? But we read that and we say, yeah, but this is a psalm. And it's meant to be showing a genuine expression, not teaching doctrine about God. We wouldn't read that and say, oh, now we know God does sleep.
Yeah, exactly. In this moment, it feels like you are not here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, go.
So Psalms, again, largely emotional, artistic, inspired expressions toward God, especially in times of difficulty. Not all of them are that, but a lot of them are that. Proverbs, wisdom.
Yes.
Again, sort of the nuance here to keep in mind. Well, you go first. Thoughts on Proverbs?
No, go.
Okay. So a couple nuances here. Proverbs are largely advice. And they're largely advice that would be true or would be received as truth even by non-Christians.
Yeah.
So they're like, this is the way life works. If you work hard, you're probably going to make more money than if you're lazy.
Yep.
That's like a dramatic oversimplification, but that's the sort of thing that's in Proverbs. So some things to keep in there, again, it's one, it will make you way wiser to read Proverbs. It will give you great insights into how people work. And it's less teaching theology and more teaching
behavior modification
or anthropology in some way. Like this is the way people work. So for example, like there's a proverb that's like, a righteous man leaves wealth for his children's children's children. We're not going to read that, I don't think, and say, if you don't die with so much money that you've taken care of all the needs of your great-grandchildren, then you're not a good person. I don't think that's the point of that verse. It's the point of that verse is more saying, the more you know God, the less you're going to lean into spending for your own pleasure, and the more you're going to lean into taking care of the needs of the people closest to you and the rest of the world. So think principles rather than like commandments. Some of them are commandments, like steering clear of the adulterous woman. That's a proverb, but it's also a commandment, and it's a commandment validated by other parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
But in general, it's like these are principles to help us understand why people work. Gosh, we could go deeper into all these. I almost feel like we should just maybe go to the next one.
I think we should go to the next one.
Let's go to the next one. Ecclesiastes is very complicated because a lot of people even debate whether or not we're supposed to trust the narrator, because it starts by saying, like, the teacher says, and people debate whether the teacher is meant to be portrayed as a good teacher versus a bad teacher.
Yeah.
You heard this before?
A little bit, yeah.
With the Ecclesiastes. So that's one you're going to want to research. Don't just read that one and be like, this is what it means. Find out the different views, find out the different options. Because like that's the book that says meaningless, everything is meaningless.
Yes.
And some people will hear that and go, see, the Bible is showing how empty life in this world is if you don't have God, which is true.
Yeah.
Other people go, no, this is what the teacher says. The teacher says meaningless, everything is meaningless. And if you read the whole book, you say this teacher's mostly wrong and is meant to be seen as wrong. And life isn't meaningless. So we can't go fully into Ecclesiastes, but just you're reading all these with a grain of salt, not a grain of salt, but like you don't just want to read it and say, there it is.
This is the truth. Like, sorry, it's not that it's not the truth. It's just that there's context with how some of these parts of the Bible are written that we have to understand.
Yes. Song of Solomon's another one. I know it's going to the next main genre, but I'm sending them real quick. Song of Solomon, it's a lot of this sort of poem about this man and woman in love.
Yeah.
Some of it's kind of...
It's intense.
Little erotic.
Yeah.
Little erotic. And a lot of people have taken this and say, hey, this is a metaphor for God's relationship with Israel. And then Mark Driscoll, R.I.P., actually still kicking. He's still going. Still going hard. R.I.P. Marcel, but not R.I.P. Mark Driscoll. He's back at it. Back at it again. He's been back at it for a while. But he was like, no, this is largely about sex. Teaching Christian people how to have sex. So who knows? But either way, it's poetic. It's poetry. Yeah.
What's next?
Prophets.
Prophets, okay.
Prophecy is the next big category. Major prophets and minor prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Daniel has some narrative in it as well.
Yep.
But there's a bunch of prophecy in it as well.
Yep.
And then the prophetic parts are often considered apocalyptic as well, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yes.
Minor prophets, it's not one is more important than the other. It's just about length. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Jonah's another tricky one. Also some narrative, but sometimes counted in the prophetic category. These are largely people writing to Israel, telling them you have to repent. Things to keep in mind as you're reading those.
I always think about God's patience a little bit.
Yep, love that.
So instead of just being like, I already told you the rules, like, I'm going to send a prophet, and the prophet's going to continue to remind you, hey, like, fix your junk, like, or this is going to end badly. And they almost never do. Yeah. And then things end badly. But it's not to be like, whoa, God is so, like, quick to justice, and like, I can't believe he did that. It's more like, really, it's like God gave them a lot of chances.
Yep.
That's
100%.
what I think about a lot of the time when I think about prophecy, especially in that context.
Yeah, I think it's very important to remember that those prophets are writing to people that have been disobeying sometimes for hundreds of years, many generations. So it's harsh trying to get their kind of attention before a final discipline from God. Also, and I think this is already baked into what you're saying.
You're good.
But those things are not really written directly to us. So if you're like, wow, God is so mad at me, we can debate how mad he is even at the Israelites, because again, he's been so patient with them. But it's not written to people under the forgiveness of Jesus. And so you can't just go, this is how God feels about me. What you can do is say, this is how God feels about long-term blatant disobedience.
Yeah.
And if you've been in long-term blatant disobedience, then again, if you've put your faith in Jesus, you're still covered by the grace of God, but you may be under his discipline in some significant ways.
Or you might not be experiencing life to the fullest.
Amen.
When we're in said hidden sin for a long time, whatever that might be. It doesn't, whatever it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Similar to what we talked about the Old Testament law, it's a window into the holiness of God and the justice of God and the patience of God. They're windows into the character of God. And some of it will apply in some ways where we are like the Israelites at the time. And sometimes we're more like the Israelites than we think we are.
Care to admit.
Care to admit. Yes. That doesn't mean all the consequences described in the prophetic books are the same as the consequences for us under the rule of Jesus. But there will be correlations. But you want to ask yourself, am I behaving? Or here's a good question to ask yourself. How am I behaving like the people that this prophetic book was written to? How am I behaving like those people? Because that's where it's going to speak to me. And there's going to be somewhere you're behaving somewhat like them, and it can be a good corrective.
Yeah.
And to know how they're behaving, sometimes the book will tell you. Sometimes you can do a little research, watch those Bible Project videos. It will help you understand the context. Get the greatest story ever told little booklet.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we got law, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We got history, storybooks. We've got wisdom and poetry, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, etc. We've got the prophetic books. 3 more quick ones, and I think we do these quicker.
Yeah,
One is the Gospels.
Yep.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Histories, narratives, but tells the story specifically of the life of Jesus.
Yep.
Similar question we can ask ourselves: what does this story teach me about God, people, and the two, and how they interact? But it's even closer to us today.
Yes.
Because it's about Jesus, who is our King. Keep going.
Keep going.
Epistles. The rest are pretty easy. Epistles, these are the letters written by the early church leaders to the churches after Jesus died, rose, and ascended into heaven.
Yep.
The epistles are the closest to us. Most of the epistles you can read and apply.
Yes.
They're the easiest to say. What it meant for them is also what it means for me.
The problems of the people, the churches that they wrote to in the epistles are pretty much the same problems we have today.
And they were under the same quote-unquote covenant.
Yeah.
So they were saved by putting their faith in Jesus, not by following the Old Testament laws. So it's the closest in that way as well. And their letters literally written telling people what to think, what to do, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The only nuances there are sometimes the things that were written because of what was going on in that culture.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, there's commandments that women need to go to church with their head covered. The vast majority of Christian scholars do not believe that particular New Testament command is still true today. Because at the time, it would be like maybe a woman showing up to church wearing a mini skirt.
Yeah.
Because it was seen as immodest if a woman didn't have her head covered. So the same way someone today might say, hey, don't show up at church, you know.
In a cheerleading outfit.
In a cheerleading outfit.
Or
It's not-
swimwear.
Swimwear. It's,
Yeah.
it's going to be distracting and not helpful.
Yeah.
Whereas today, a woman showing up with her head uncovered doesn't send the same message or make people feel the same things. There's the epistles.
Yep.
Lastly is apocalyptic, which again, people would sometimes just lump all the, like the Bible Project guys lump a lot of these together, and there's good reasons to do that, but apocalyptic would be sort of end times oriented. I don't know, I'm getting animated. Revelation, the main one, and then the parts of Daniel that are very future oriented. And those are kind of poetic, symbolic metaphors describing the end of time.
Yep.
And this is, we'll have to do a whole episode of Revelation at some time.
We will do a whole episode on Revelation.
We got to get some good guests on for that one too. Maybe a couple guests.
Oh, wow. That'd be cool.
That'd be cool, right?
4 guests.
Our
or
producers
4
are
of us.
like, how are we going to get this all on camera? But yeah, Revelation is one of those ones where I always encourage people to proceed with extreme caution because they are metaphors and images, and it is hard. Historically, everyone has said this means this. Oftentimes, especially with predicting, the return of Christ, are wrong. They've been wrong.
Well, they've only been wrong.
They've only been wrong, especially with the return of Christ.
Yeah. Because the ones that are still right, their timelines are in the future. But anyways, it's not that we'll get into all that, but it does describe future events, what we should expect, what we should see.
Yeah.
It definitely is important, though.
Yes.
There's
there for a reason.
It's there for a reason, and it's just it's a very difficult group of passages to interpret. That's all.
Yep.
So, and there's even a part at the start that's just about what the church's issues were of the time, which is very short.
That's more practical.
But that's very practical.
Yep.
Which I actually didn't know until recently. I was like, oh, like that's kind of funny. I bet you all of the churches in the U.S. or every church can relate to a lot of these issues that those churches were seeing, which is probably concerning. But
yeah. Tale as old as time.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Those are the 7 genres of the Bible. And
with a few tidbits on how to read them.
And yeah, that's really it. I think the only other thing I would mention is when you're reading the Bible, what I found when I was looking into these different genres is if I just jump around the Bible, I might take a lot of stuff out of context. It's also, I think, why the Bible talks about meditate on Scripture day and night. Like, get the whole thing, read it several times, which I know that all sounds very overwhelming for the first person. Just start. That's okay to just start and not understand everything right away. But there's going to be things that are happening through the Bible that connect to each other from one part of the Bible to the other. There's going to be context you understand. Like, if we understand in the Old Testament that Egypt usually meant bad, like there's a bad king there who's doing bad things. You think about the first time I think Egypt is mentioned is with Abraham, and he lies about his wife being his sister.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple other Egypty things that happen in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And then it flips when you get to the New Testament, and you're like, oh, Joseph and Mary escaped to Egypt. That's odd. Isn't that the bad place?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny when you can start to make these connections, because it's like, well, they were safe in Egypt because actually the king that was bad was actually in Jerusalem, King Herod at the time, which wanted to kill Jesus. So there's just funny things that'll connect over time. And if you read the whole Bible over time, you'll start to make a lot of these connections. And like we talked about earlier, the details, the words that they use will start to connect. And then, so I would encourage people to especially just like a book. Don't start in the middle of a book or the end of a story. Like, do you remember the story of Gideon? Gideon, he continues to ask God for the fleece, and he asks for all these signs that he's going to be successful in his war and this overcoming of, I don't know even who they were at this point. But I heard one person say, when they jumped to the end of the story and they were like, oh, Gideon asked for a sign, God gave him a sign. Well, that means I should just ask for a sign to make a decision, to do something. But actually the whole story was God told him to do something, and Gideon asked for like 4 signs in a row. And the moral of the story was not ask God for a sign, he will show up. It was, God gives us more than we need to trust him, basically. There's something to that effect. So when we jump around the Bible, we can start to take things out of context.
That's great. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. The more you read it, the more you see, the more you understand it, the more sense it makes, the more connections. 100%. Love that.
So, well, I think that's all we have for today. So,
I think that's all we have. Should we do a quick preview for the 4 people still watching?
Yeah.
Based on some of the things me and you already talked about.
I forgot the names, so why don't you say the names?
The people coming?
Yeah.
Yeah, so next week, let me pull up my little spreadsheet. Beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, beep, boo. Podcast guest. Here it is. Next week, we have Ryan Snow from the Vineyard.
From the Hunger Games.
Ryan Snow from the Hunger Games.
There's a Snow in there. Like,
there is Commander Snow or something?
The leader dude.
Yeah, it's him. It's Ryan Snow coming in character as the Snow character. No, just kidding. Ryan Snow, he's the lead pastor of the Vineyard Florence, which is a church we've had a long-term relationship with. I think it was founding pastor, Barry Long, a good friend of our founding pastor. I know he's preached here before. I think before my time. I tried to get him to come once and something didn't work out schedule-wise. Barry's son, Joe, is a pastor as well at the Vineyard Covington.
Okay.
So Ryan, this is all Vineyard people who we've had close relationships with. Ryan's a great guy. So he's going to come, and most likely we're going to talk about speaking in tongues.
Yeah, that's right.
That's something we did not deep dive in this Holy Spirit series, and something people have so many questions about.
Right. And that's why we're here, to dig deeper into things we're not going to talk about on Sunday mornings. And this is an example of one of them.
Yep. Amen. Then the next one, July 1, we got Doug Hartley.
Doug.
Plum Creek, just down the road.
Cool.
In this general region, it's kind of the Bridge, Plum Creek, and Main Street Baptist are sort of the three kind of like bigger churches. We will spend time together sometimes, just shooting the breeze, just talking about pastoring in this region. So Doug will be on, and that'll be a great time. And then I'm still working on Main Street Baptist Bill Edwards. I've texted him. He was on vacay. He's going to text me back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And we'll get him on as well. But we don't have a date confirmed for him yet.
Stephen will be back on, I hope.
Stephen will be back on for sure. Likely to talk about Israel and God's view, or not God's view, our view of God's sort of place that Israel holds post Jesus, which is a very controversial topic.
So how should we view Israel today?
How do we view Israel today? Do they still have the blessing of God, or have they been replaced by the church?
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. So cool. Very fun. Well, thank you guys for sticking along so long. Really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. I know we had one comment last week that said, gosh, you should really try to go shorter. If that's what a lot of people are thinking, please tell us. We want to know. And maybe we'll simplify some topics and cut them down a little bit. But for now, this is what you get. But tell us if you really feel that way.
Yeah.
But maybe those people aren't listening anymore because it's too long for them.
Who knows? Who knows?
So,
yep.
So anyways, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks.